Welcome, traveler. Tonight the world grows quiet. The stars drift slowly above ancient skies. The oceans rest beneath silver moonlight, and every story softens into calm. So settle gently into your pillow, let your breathing slow, and allow this peaceful journey to carry you far beyond the waking world. In this quiet place of myth, dreams, and endless night, there is nothing to do, nowhere to be, only the comfort of listening. Close your eyes, and let the story begin. Settle in now. Let your body become heavier against whatever is holding it. Let your shoulders release the weight they have been carrying all day, that slight forward tension, that held-up quality that the body takes on in the daylight hours and forgets to put down when the light changes. You can put it down now. There is nothing here that requires it. Tonight we are going somewhere very old. Somewhere that exists in the part of the world's memory that is too ancient for documents, too ancient even for the oldest writing. We are going to a time when the gods were young, when the world was still finding its shape and the stories that would hold it together were only just beginning to be told. We are going to find Athena, not the marble figure on the Acropolis, not the statue or the symbol or the abstraction. The living presence, the one who moved through the ancient world with her gray eyes and her steady intelligence, who guided heroes and weavers and architects and sailors, who held in her long divine life something that the Greeks understood as irreplaceable, the quality of wisdom freely given. But before we can come to Athena, we must come to the world she was born into. And that world begins, as all worlds begin, with the slow emergence of something from nothing. In the beginning, the ancient Greeks said, there was chaos. Not chaos as we use the word, not the noise and rush of disorder. This was the original vast quiet, the formless dark that existed before the world decided what it would become. Think of it as the moment just before sleep takes you, that borderland where the shapes of the day have dissolved but the shapes of dreams have not yet formed. A held breath, perfect stillness. From that stillness things emerged. Gaia rose, the earth herself, solid and patient and ancient, the foundation upon which everything else would eventually rest. Above her came Uranus, the sky, wide and dark and filled with the cold light of the stars that were appearing for the first time in any sky. And between them, in time, the other first things, the mountains that Gaia raised from herself like slow, enormous exhalations. The sea, filling the low places, cold and restless and already full of a depth that could not be measured. From Gaia and Uranus came the Titans, 12 great beings, each one a fundamental force given form, as though the world had looked at its own essential qualities and decided to make people of them. Oceanus, who was the great river surrounding all the known world. Hyperion, who carried in him something of light itself. Themis, whose name meant divine order, the deep law beneath all laws. Mnemosyne, who was memory, and it is worth pausing there for a moment because memory is not a small thing in a world where the gods are ancient beyond counting. Without mnemosyne, nothing that happened would be carried forward. Without memory, each moment would be the world's entire history, which is no history at all. And there was Ceus, and Crius, and Iapetus, and Kronos, the youngest, the most ambitious, the one who would tip the first great age of the world into the age that followed. From the Titans came children, and from those children came the gods we are here to speak of tonight. Kronos became king of the Titans in a way that cost both father and son something they never fully recovered. His father Uranus had kept Gaia's children hidden, had feared what they might become, had pressed them back rather than let them grow. Gaia gave Kronos a blade of gray flint, and the age of Uranus ended, and Kronos took the sky's throne for his own. But he carried his father's fear forward like an inheritance. A prophecy reached him, those words that lodge in the mind the way splinters lodge in skin, impossible to ignore and impossible to reach. Your own child will overthrow you, as you overthrew your father. And Kronos, who was powerful and clever and deeply afraid, responded by swallowing each of his children as they were born. Hestia first, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon. His wife Rhea bore all of this with the patient suffering of a mother watching something irreversible happen, and bore it, and finally, with the last child, decided that she had borne enough. Zeus was hidden. A stone was wrapped in cloth and handed to Kronos, who swallowed it without looking. And Zeus grew up in a cave on the island of Crete, tended by nymphs, nursed by the goat Amalthea, protected by the noise of the Curetes who clashed their bronze shields together whenever the infant cried. He grew, he learned, and in time, with wisdom borrowed from the goddess Métis, whose name meant counsel, cunning, the intelligence that finds a path through what seems impassable. He gave Kronos a draft that undid what Kronos had done. His siblings returned. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all of them grown now, all of them themselves, all of them ready. The war that followed, the great Titanomachy, the conflict between the Titans who had ruled the world and the Olympian gods who would rule what came after, lasted, the old stories say, 10 years. But let us not dwell in the noise of it. Let us observe it from a distance, the way you observe a storm from inside a warm building. Aware of its force, glad of the shelter, watching it pass. The storm passed. The Titans fell. The three brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, drew lots for the great domains. Zeus drew the sky. Poseidon drew the sea. Hades drew the deep underworld. And the earth itself and Olympus, the mountain above clouds that became the meeting place of all the gods. These were held in common, belonging to all of them and to none. Zeus took his throne on Olympus. And very shortly after, he did something that would change everything. He swallowed the goddess Métis. The story of how Athena came into the world is one of the strangest and most vivid in all of Greek mythology. And the Greeks told it with a kind of relish for its strangeness that suggests they understood that the strangest stories are often the ones that carry the most truth. Before Zeus married Hera, or perhaps alongside it, in the complicated chronology of divine genealogy, he was with Métis. She of the deep counsel. She whose mind moved through problems the way water moves through stone. Not with force but with the patient intelligence of finding every available crack. Métis became pregnant, and a prophecy came to Zeus as prophecies came to his father and his grandfather before him, through some channel of knowing that the gods had access to in the oldest ages, a voice from somewhere deeper than the conscious mind. The prophecy said, "The child that Métis carries will be extraordinary. First a daughter, and then, if given the time, a son, and the son will be greater than his father." Zeus heard this and did what kings do when they are more afraid than wise. He swallowed Métis. There is a repetition here that the Greeks clearly intended, the echo of Kronos swallowing his children, the pattern of the powerful trying to contain the future inside themselves rather than letting it grow freely. Zeus, who had suffered the consequences of his father's fear, now acted from the same impulse. This is what myth does with its repetitions. It shows you the patterns in how power behaves, the cycles that are very difficult to break. But what happened next was not what happened with Kronos. Inside Zeus, Métis continued. She was not destroyed by being swallowed. She was Métis, the divine intelligence, and the divine intelligence cannot simply be consumed and nullified. She worked. She made things. The old stories say that she made armor for the child she was carrying, that she fashioned a helmet and a robe and everything her daughter would need, hammering them carefully in the interior dark of the god who had tried to stop her. The hammering gave Zeus terrible headaches, blinding pain, building over days, a pressure behind his eyes that no rest or remedy could touch. Nothing helped. The pain only grew. He called for Hephaestus, the craftsman god, the smith whose skill with metal was unmatched among all the gods. In some versions of the story, Hephaestus came with his tools. In others, it was Prometheus or Hermes or some other divine presence who understood what was needed. But the moment is always the same, a blow to the head of Zeus. And from that blow, from that opening in the skull of the king of the gods, Athena was born. She came out fully grown, already armored, already herself, her silver breastplate gleaming, her helmet set on her gray-eyed head, her spear raised in the war cry that was both greeting and declaration. She stepped into the light of Olympus as something complete, as though she had been waiting inside that impossible space simply until the moment was right, and then had arrived entirely and without hesitation. She cried out. The sound of it reached the ends of the world. The old poets say that the sea rose in response, that the earth shuddered, that the gods on Olympus went quiet with astonishment. And then the sound settled, and Athena lowered her spear, and looked around at the world that she had entered, and the world looked back at her. The sun god Helios stopped his chariot in the sky at the sound of her arrival. He held his horses still for just a moment, looking down at the figure standing before Zeus, this new presence, fully formed, fully armed, fully illuminated in the sudden golden light. And then the moment passed and Helios drove on, and the day continued, and Athena was part of it now. She was Zeus's daughter in a way that no other child of his was. She had been inside him. She had been made by his swallowing of the divine intelligence, of Métis, the counsel, the cunning mind. And when she emerged, she brought with her something of both parents simultaneously. The authority of Zeus, the will that commands and shapes and decides, and the intelligence of Métis, the deep, patient, resource-finding mind that does not batter against walls but finds the places in them that give way. She was, from the first moment, the synthesis of these two things: power and intelligence, action and wisdom, the spear that strikes and the mind that understands where to strike and when and why. The Greeks called her Pallas Athena, though the origins of the name Pallas are old enough to be uncertain, folded into a history that even the classical Greek scholars could not fully trace. She was the goddess of wisdom, yes, but also of craft, of the skilled making of things, of warfare in its most strategic and thoughtful dimension rather than its most chaotic one. She was the patron of weavers and potters and architects. She was the guide of heroes. She was the embodiment of the idea that intelligence is the most powerful force in the world when it is allowed to work without obstruction. She was also, from the beginning, one who chose to remain entirely herself. Unlike many of the Olympian gods, Athena took no husband and no lover. She was her own. This was not a lack but a quality, a completeness that required no addition, a wholeness that was not improved by partnership but only remained what it was: the focused, undivided attention of a mind that had no distractions from its purpose. The Greeks called this quality Parthenos, the virgin, the unmixed, the uncompromised, and the most famous temple ever built was named for it. Let us rest with Athena for a moment before the stories begin, before we follow her through the great myths that shaped the ancient world. Let us simply be with what she was. Imagine standing in a quiet room at night. The room is lit by a single lamp, oil, in a shallow ceramic dish, the flame very still in the windless air. The walls are cool white marble. There are scrolls on shelves along one wall, hundreds of them, carefully stored, their contents representing an enormous range of human thought and human making. Athena is in this room. She is not performing anything. She is not dressed for battle or for ceremony. She is simply present, tall and still and gray-eyed, wearing undyed wool, her owl somewhere nearby in the dark outside the window. She is thinking, not in the urgent, pressured way of someone trying to solve something that frightens them, but in the open, calm way of a mind that enjoys its own functioning, that moves through problems the way someone moves through a garden they love, with attention and pleasure rather than anxiety. This is how I want you to hold Athena as we move through her stories. Not the armored figure on the temple pediment, or not only that, but this quiet presence in a lamplit room at night, thinking, always present, always watching the world with those gray eyes that see more than they announce. Her symbols were few and deliberate. The owl, the little owl of Greece, with its round amber eyes and its capacity to see clearly in complete darkness. The owl sees what others cannot when the light is gone. The owl hunts in silence. The owl is not the most impressive bird in the sky, not the eagle of Zeus with its enormous wingspan and its authority. The owl is small and careful and perfectly adapted for exactly what it does. This, the Greeks understood, was wisdom, not the largest or the loudest thing in the world. The thing that sees most clearly, the thing that knows how to be quiet and patient until the right moment, and then is precise. The olive tree was hers as well, not the oak, which is Olympus and grandeur and the long continuity of the world, not the laurel, which is achievement and the garlands of victory. The olive tree gnarled, slow-growing, giving its fruit only after years of patient waiting, requiring tending and attention and the deep knowledge of the person who keeps it. Silvery-leaved, gray-green, moving in the wind with a sound unlike any other tree, giving oil for lamps, for food, for the preservation of things, for the anointment of the honored and the sacred. The olive tree is not glamorous. It is useful, and the gray-eyed goddess was above all, useful, to the heroes she guided, to the city she protected, to the mortals who prayed to her not for glory but for clarity of mind. The Aegis. This was her other great symbol, a breastplate or shield or garment made from divine material, sometimes said to be draped with the skin of a creature defeated in battle, always described as gleaming and terrible, capable of inspiring awe and panic in those who beheld it in the wrong frame of mind. It was the physical representation of her divine authority, that beneath the calm, beneath the owl and the olive tree and the thoughtful gray eyes, there was an enormous power, a power that was all the more formidable for being disciplined. She wore the Gorgon Medusa's head on her aegis, the same Medusa whose petrifying gaze had turned countless men to stone before Perseus cut off her head. Perseus, who had the help of Athena throughout his quest, who received from her the mirrored shield that let him approach Medusa without looking directly at her, who fought with the intelligence she helped him develop rather than with brute strength alone. Even in death, Medusa's power was made to serve the goddess of wisdom. The terrible gaze that had been a danger became a warning on Athena's breast, radiating authority rather than chaos. This is characteristic of Athena. She takes the dangerous thing and turns it toward purpose. She takes the crisis and finds in it what can be learned. She takes the roaring of the world and finds the silence underneath it where real understanding lies. There is a story that defines Athens more than any other. It is the story of how the city got its name, and more than that, how it came to be protected by the goddess of wisdom rather than by any of the more dramatic forces available in the Olympian pantheon. The city was young then. The rocks of the Acropolis rose above the plain of Attica, those great pale stones lifting themselves from the earth in the way of places that seemed chosen by something rather than merely existing. The flat top of the rock was already being thought of as sacred, as the kind of place where the sky and the earth meet, where what is above and what is below are close enough that the boundary between them becomes permeable. Two gods wanted to be patron of this place. Poseidon came first, or they came at the same moment. The old stories offer both versions, and perhaps both are true, or perhaps the meeting was so significant that the memory of it became simultaneous in the telling. Poseidon, the dark-haired god of the sea, carrying his trident, flanked by the horses of the deep water, came to the Acropolis to make his claim. Athena came from Olympus, calm and gray-eyed, her owl silent on her shoulder, her helmet gleaming in the Attic sun. They stood on the high rock together. A judgment would be needed. The other gods assembled, or the first people of Athens assembled, or both, in that way that divine and mortal attention often converges on the same significant moment. And the judgment was simple in its logic. Each god would offer a gift to the city. The city would choose. Poseidon struck the rock first. His trident came down on the pale stone of the Acropolis, and the stone split wide, a crack deep and true, and from it water surged upward, a spring rising from the solid rock by the power of the sea god's will. The people came forward and looked at it and marveled at the force of it. The clear water rising from stone where water should not be. They tasted it. Salt. The water was seawater. The salt of Poseidon's domain coming up through the rock, offering the city a connection to the great sea trade routes, to the fish of the Mediterranean, to the wealth and the danger and the power of the maritime world. It was a generous and a genuine gift. It was the most powerful thing Poseidon knew how to give. Then Athena knelt. She pressed her hand to the pale stone of the Acropolis. She did not strike it or command it or make the earth shake. She simply placed her palm against the rock, the way you place your hand against the bark of a tree to feel whether it is alive. And an olive tree grew. It came up from the stone slowly or all at once. The stories differ. Growing from the very rock of the hilltop with its roots finding whatever soil existed in the thin crevices of the Acropolis, lifting its gray-green canopy into the Attic air, its leaves already moving in the coastal wind that was always blowing across the height of the rock. The people looked at the salt spring. They looked at the olive tree. They chose. The decision was not made out of ingratitude toward Poseidon, or from any failure to appreciate the power he offered. It was made because the city of Athens was becoming something specific, a city of craft and thought and the accumulated arts of civilization, a city that would build and write and argue and wonder and teach. For that city, the olive tree was more right than the sea. For that city, patient productivity was more nourishing than nautical power. The city was named Athens. Poseidon was not pleased, and his displeasure expressed itself in the way that the sea's displeasure always does, through the water. He flooded the plain of Attica, the waves rising over the coastal fields until the gods intervened and the waters were persuaded to withdraw. But Athens belonged to Athena, and that olive tree, the one she pressed from the stone with the palm of her hand, remained on the Acropolis for centuries. Long after the first people of that telling were gone. Long after the first temples were built and rebuilt and built again on the rock above the city. It grew slowly, as olive trees grow, adding its small annual amount to itself, becoming over the generations something massive and gnarled and deeply rooted in the thin soil of the high place. When the Persians came, in the time of the great wars between Greece and the Empire of the East, they burned the Acropolis. They burned the temple and the altar and everything that could be burned, and among the burning was the olive tree of Athena, or at least its trunk and branches, its above-ground form. But the roots held. And the day after the Persians had gone, when the Athenians came back to their scorched Acropolis to assess what remained, they found a green shoot. It had come up from the burned trunk, from the root system that the fire could not reach. A new branch, pale green and tender, reaching up from the carbonized wood into the Attic air. The Athenians looked at this and understood it as a message. Not a miracle exactly. Olive trees do this. They are among the most persistent living things in the world, capable of surviving fire and drought and centuries of neglect, always returning from their roots if the roots are alive. But the timing of it, the morning after the burning, the green shoot reaching up in the place where the ancient tree had stood, this they understood as Athena's presence in the catastrophe. A sign that the city would return, that what was essential could not be burned away, that the root of things held even when everything above the surface was gone. Athens was rebuilt, and atop the Acropolis, in the greatest building project in the ancient Greek world, they built a temple for her. The Parthenon. Let the word sit for a moment in the quiet of whatever room you are in. Let the syllables of it do what they do, that particular combination of sounds that has been associated for 2,500 years with a specific image, a specific quality of white marble in afternoon light, a specific arrangement of columns against a specific blue sky. Parthenon. The name comes from her title Athena Parthenos, Athena the virgin, the unmixed, the complete in herself. And the building was completed in the age of Pericles, in the 5th century before the Common Era, in a period when Athens was at the height of its power and its creative energy and its sense of itself as the center of something important. The architects were Ectinus and Callicrates. The sculptor who oversaw the decorations was Phidias, one of the greatest artists the ancient world produced, a man whose sculptures of the gods set the visual standard for what divine beings were imagined to look like for centuries afterward. It was built on the highest point of the Acropolis. The approach to it was gradual, intentional, designed to build the experience of arrival over time rather than delivering it all at once. You came up through the Propylaea, the great marble gateway that framed the transition from the city below to the sacred precinct above, and as you passed through it and the city fell away behind you and the open sky of the hilltop opened ahead, the Parthenon was always there, already visible, already drawing the eye, already claiming its position as the destination. Its columns were Doric, the oldest and most restrained of the Greek column orders, without the ornate capital of the Corinthian or the elegant scroll of the Ionic. Just the plain, powerful fluting of a column that knows what it is and does not need to announce it. There were 8 across the front, which was more than the usual 6, giving the Parthenon a breadth and a horizontal authority that most temples did not have. And everything was very slightly curved. This is one of the extraordinary secrets of the Parthenon, the adjustments made in every horizontal and vertical surface to account for the way the eye perceives straight lines, which is to say, the way straight lines do not actually appear straight from certain distances and angles. The floor of the Parthenon curves upward very slightly in the center. The columns lean inward very slightly. If extended upward, all the columns would meet at a single point miles above the building. These adjustments are not visible to the eye. That is precisely the point. The eye perceives them as corrections to optical distortions it would otherwise notice, and the result is a building that looks more perfect than a truly geometrically perfect building would look. The Parthenon achieves the appearance of pure mathematical ideal through the opposite of mathematical purity, through deliberate, calculated imprecision applied so carefully that it produces the experience of precision. This is wisdom applied to architecture. Inside the Parthenon, in the great central chamber, stood Phidias's chryselephantine statue of Athena, made from gold and ivory, over 40 feet tall, the most elaborate cult statue in the ancient world. She stood in full armor, helmet on her head, her aegis across her chest with Medusa's face at its center, her right hand holding a small figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, and her left hand resting on a great decorated shield. At her feet, a coiled serpent, and her eyes, even in a statue made of gold and ivory, even in the vast interior of the Parthenon where the statue was so large as to be overwhelming, the eyes were described by ancient visitors as the most striking thing about the figure, gray and still and somehow alive in the way that very great sculpture achieves life. Not through realism but through the quality of attention the sculptor brought to the making. The statue is gone now. It was removed in late antiquity, and what happened to it after that is uncertain, lost or melted or carried away. But the building remains, or the substantial ruins of it remain, still on the Acropolis, still framing its view of the sky, still demonstrating that white marble in certain light is not simply a material but a statement about what human beings can do when they are working at their fullest capacity. They built this for Athena, who was born from a blow struck to a god's skull, who pressed an olive tree from bare rock with the palm of her hand, who watched over the city from the height of the Acropolis with those gray and attentive eyes. There is a story about a girl who was too proud. Her name was Arachne, and she was a weaver from a region called Lydia, in what is now Western Turkey. She was not famous for anything her family had done or for any connection to the divine world. She was famous for this one thing: she could weave. She could weave with a skill so extraordinary that people came from neighboring villages to watch her work, to see the way her hands moved through the threads, the way the fabric grew on the loom, the way the colors she chose assembled themselves into images that seemed to breathe. She was young, and she was proud in the way that the very talented sometimes become proud, not because they are bad people, but because extraordinary skill, when it arrives early and is widely praised, can outgrow its container. The praise fills the person and they become more of the praise than of the skill. She began to say that her weaving surpassed the weaving of Athena. She said this casually at first, and then more deliberately, and then as a point of identity. This is who Arachne is. This is the girl who weaves better than the goddess of craft herself. Word reached Athena, as words always reach those who are named in them. Athena came to Arachne in disguise, as an old woman, bent with age, wearing the gray wool of ordinary life, unremarkable in every way. She came to Arachne's workshop where the loom was and the threads were hung in their organized abundance, and the finished fabrics were displayed along the walls. She spoke gently. She said, "I have heard what you say about your weaving. I would not presume to judge it myself. I am too old and my eyes are not what they were. But I wonder if you might reconsider the comparison you have made. The gods are powerful, and they do not always take lightly the things that are said about them. Even if your skill is very great, and I believe it is, there might be wisdom in a little humility." Arachne looked at the old woman, and she said no. She said it politely but clearly. She said that she stood by what she had said, that her weaving was her own and no one else's, that she had not been taught by any god and did not intend to take back words that were simply true. She said, "If Athena thinks she weaves better than I do, let her come and show me." The old woman straightened. The gray wool fell away. The gray eyes were present in their full quality, attentive, calm, and now carrying in them the particular weight of something very old and very patient that has been pushed too far. Athena said, "I am here." 2 looms were set up side by side, the loom of Athena and the loom of Arachne, facing each other in the workshop with the morning light coming through the window and the smell of wool in the air and the tension of the moment filling the space between the 2 figures, the goddess and the mortal girl, as they settled before their work. What Athena wove was the story of Athens. She wove the Acropolis in threads of pale gold and gray, the rock rising above the city. She wove herself pressing the olive tree from the stone, the tree growing green in the threads. She wove Poseidon striking the rock with his trident and the salt spring rising. She wove the gods assembled in judgment, their faces serene and their postures the postures of the divine. And in each corner of the tapestry, she wove a warning. For smaller scenes, each showing a mortal who had challenged the gods and had been transformed by their defiance. Not as punishment exactly, but as consequence. As the natural result of the world's proportions being violated. The tapestry of Athena was perfectly made. Not made to be impressive, not made to display skill for its own sake, but made with the deep craft of someone who understands what fabric can carry, how weight is distributed through a textile, how color moves the eye, how a figure in motion looks different from a figure at rest, how to make the threads speak the thing they are trying to say. And what Arachne wove was equally extraordinary. She wove the gods, not as the gods wove themselves, not in their authority and their majesty and their carefully maintained dignity. She wove them in their other moments, the ones the myths recorded but the temples did not emphasize. She wove Zeus's various transformations, the bull, the swan, the shower of gold, and the stories behind those transformations. She wove Poseidon and Dionysus and Apollo in the moments when the power of the gods had been used in ways that were complicated at best. Her work was beautiful, and her subject was the truth or a truth, the difficult kind, the kind that the powerful would rather not see depicted in someone else's art. Athena looked at what Arachne had made. The skill of it was undeniable. The weaving was technically flawless, the threads even, the colors precisely placed, the images clear and alive. It was on the level of pure craft, equal to anything Athena had produced. But the subject, Athena was angry, or she felt something that in a god functions as anger does in a person, a sharp recognition of being seen in a way she had not chosen, of having the divine complexity displayed for a mortal's entertainment, of the particular arrogance of making art about power in the face of the very power you are depicting. She struck the loom. The tapestry fell. And Arachne, who had poured everything she had into this moment and who had not been wrong about her skill and who found that being not wrong was, in this case, not enough, Arachne despaired. She reached for a rope. What happened next the old stories tell in two ways. In one telling, Athena caught Arachne in time. In another, she transformed her from what she was about to do. Either way, the result was the same. Athena looked at the girl before her. This young, talented, arrogant, honest, foolish, gifted person who was being destroyed by the same quality that had made her extraordinary, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly. Athena was not in the business of explaining that consequences could be avoided, but something that recognized what Arachne was. Something that wanted the gift not to be lost even if the pride had cost too much. She touched Arachne, and Arachne became a spider. The threads of her loom became the first web, that extraordinary construction, the same web that still appears in every corner of every old room, in every garden in the morning dew, that we still call by her name. Arachnid, Arachne, she continued to weave, in threads far finer than any human hand could spin, in patterns that no human loom could produce, with a speed and precision that made the weaving she had done as a mortal seem like practice for this. The web became her art, and she became the web, and the craft she had been given continued in a different form. The old stories hold this conclusion with a kind of ambivalence that feels honest. Was it a punishment? Was it a mercy? Was it both? The transformation gave Arachne what she wanted, to weave forever, to weave beyond the limits of a human life, to produce art in a material of such extraordinary fineness that it cannot be replicated by any other means. But it also took from her everything that was not weaving, everything that was simply being a person in the world. Athena does not resolve this neatly. The story does not resolve it neatly. It simply is one of those myths that rewards sitting with rather than rushing through, that offers more on the second and third encounter than it did on the first. The spider weaves. The story continues. Among the heroes of the ancient world, Athena appeared and disappeared in ways that she designed rather than ways that happened to her. She did not simply show up at every critical moment with a solution. She appeared with a specific thing, a tool, a perspective, a piece of information that the hero did not have and could not have found alone, and then she withdrew. She trusted the heroes she helped with the doing of the thing she had made possible. Perseus is the earliest of the great heroes she guided, and his story is the story of how an impossible task becomes possible when approached with the right intelligence. Perseus was the son of Zeus and Danae, born in a tower of bronze where his grandfather Acrisius had shut his mother away. because a prophecy had told Acrisius that his daughter's son would one day kill him, and Acrisius had responded in the way that people respond to prophecies they fear, by trying to prevent the conditions of the prophecy rather than examining the behaviors that had generated it. Zeus found Danae nonetheless, as gods do, and Perseus was born. Acrisius, unable to kill his own daughter and grandchild directly, put them in a wooden chest and committed them to the sea. The sea, in its way, was kind. It carried the chest to the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found them and gave them shelter. Perseus grew up on Seriphos, and the king of Seriphos, Polydectes, wanted Danae. He wanted her in the way of men who have power and have confused it with the right, to want whatever they can see. Perseus stood between Polydectes and his mother, and Polydectes saw Perseus as an obstacle. He set Perseus an impossible task, intending that it would remove the obstacle permanently. Bring me the head of Medusa, Medusa the Gorgon, one of 3 sisters with hair of living serpents and a gaze that turned whatever it fell on directly into stone. She lived at the edge of the world, where the world grew strange and the light was wrong, and the petrified forms of men who had tried and failed stood as a permanent warning and a permanent landscape. Perseus said yes, because he was young and he was proud and he was trying to protect his mother, and because the impossible task is always the one that announces itself most clearly as the thing that matters. Athena came to him. She came quietly, as she preferred to come, not in full divine display, not with light and sound and the terror of the truly overwhelming. She simply came, and she was there, and she brought with her what he needed: a mirrored shield, bronze, polished to a finish so fine that it held the world in its surface as clearly as a pool of still water. She gave him this, and she explained, "Look at Medusa only in the reflection. See her only in the mirror. The mirror shows you the truth of what is there without the direct connection that the truth requires to petrify you. You can act on what you see in a mirror without being destroyed by it. The principle is wisdom, not the wisdom of the proverb or the philosophy, the practical wisdom of someone who has looked at a specific problem very carefully and found the feature of it that can be worked with. Medusa's power requires eye contact. The solution is to remove eye contact while preserving sight. The mirror is the solution." Hermes helped as well. Hermes, the quick messenger, who was half-brother to Perseus and who had his own reasons for wishing the quest to succeed. He provided winged sandals, the harp sickle sword. The Grii, 3 ancient sisters who shared a single eye between them, were persuaded to reveal the location of the nymphs of the north, who provided the cap of invisibility and the kibisis bag to hold what Perseus would bring back. And Perseus went to the edge of the world. He found Medusa sleeping, looking only in the mirrored shield. He saw her clearly, the living hair, the sleeping face, the terrible potential of those closed eyes. And with the harp, he acted swiftly and without hesitation, which is the thing that Athena had prepared him to be capable of. Not just the knowledge of what to do, but the readiness to do it when the moment came. From the blood of Medusa, where it fell on the sea foam, the white horse Pegasus rose, which is one of the most beautiful moments in any mythology, the extraordinary emerging from the terrible, the gift hidden inside the horror. Perseus carried the head back in the kibisis bag and did not look at it. He rescued Andromeda from the sea monster on his return. He turned Polydectes and his court to stone when he arrived at Seriphos, and Polydectes had not kept his mother safe. He gave Medusa's head to Athena, who placed it on her aegis where it would remain. No longer a danger but a protection. The petrifying gaze turned outward to warn those who would threaten the goddess of wisdom. And the detail in the story that matters most for what it says about Athena. She did not kill Medusa for Perseus. She gave him what he needed to do it himself. This is her method, always her method. The great war at Troy was not a simple thing. Nothing about it was simple. Not its causes, not its conduct, not its ending, not the long, impossible homecomings that followed. It gathered into itself the gods and the heroes of 2 generations, the full weight of the Mediterranean world's conflicts and alliances and pride and grief, and it lasted 10 years, which is a very long time to maintain any enterprise. The gods were not neutral. Hera and Athena favored the Greeks. Aphrodite and Ares favored the Trojans. Poseidon moved between positions. Apollo protected Troy in some moments and let it be damaged in others. And Zeus watched from above with the complicated attention of a being who has favorites but understands that what he is watching is necessary, that the war is moving the world towards something that cannot be arrived at without this passage through fire and grief. Athena's role in the Trojan War is long and involves many people and many moments. But there are two that define it. The first is Odysseus. Athena loved Odysseus in the way that wisdom loves intelligence, recognizing in another mind the quality that is most familiar and most valued in itself. Odysseus was not the strongest of the Greek commanders. He was not the most beautiful, not the most traditionally heroic in the physical sense. What he was the cleverest. He was the one who, when all other approaches had failed, could find the angle of approach that the problem had not yet defended against. He was hers. She walked with him through the war in the way that she walked with her chosen heroes, not constantly visible, not always announced, but present in the quality of his thinking. In the counsels he gave that turned out to be exactly right. In the plans he proposed that others dismissed and were eventually proven to have been correct. The wooden horse. This is the idea the ancient world most permanently associated with Odysseus, the stratagem that finally ended 10 years of siege. A great horse of wood, hollow, large enough to conceal the best fighters of the Greek army in its belly, left outside the gates of Troy as the Greek fleet appeared to sail away, brought inside the walls by the Trojans, who interpreted it as a sacred object. In the night the horse opened, the fighters came out, the gates were opened, the Greek fleet returned, and Troy fell. The horse was Odysseus's idea, but the idea has Athena's quality all over it. Not the massive force of an army trying to break through a wall, but the intelligence that understands that a wall has doors, and that doors can be opened from the inside, and that the way to get someone to open their door to you is to give them a reason to want to. The second defining moment of Athena's role in the Trojan War is darker. At the fall of Troy, one of the Greek warriors, Ajax the Lesser, committed a terrible act in the temple of Athena. He seized and harmed a Trojan woman who had taken sanctuary there, in the precinct of the goddess, in the sacred space where violence was absolutely prohibited. Athena saw this. She who had helped the Greeks throughout 10 years of war. She who had been on their side, had guided their greatest minds, had worked toward their victory. She went to Zeus and Poseidon. She asked for storms. On the Greek fleet's homeward voyage, the storms came. Catastrophic storms, the kind that break ships and scatter fleets and kill men by the thousands. The Greeks who had been victors at Troy found that the god's favor is not a permanent condition, that what is given can be taken back when the terms of its giving are violated. Athena's care for the Greeks was real. Her protection of her sacred spaces was also real. And when those two realities came into conflict, she chose the one that spoke to who she was most fundamentally. The law held. The sanctity of the temple held. The consequence of violating it was real. This is wisdom in its most demanding expression. Not just the pleasant kind, the guidance and the gifts and the help in difficult moments, but the accountability that makes the guidance meaningful. The understanding that the principles only count if they count when it is costly for them to count. Of all the relationships in Athena's long mythological life, the one with Odysseus is the most sustained and the most revealing. It extends from before the Trojan War through the 10 years that followed it, the Odyssey, that long homecoming that was not a homecoming for so long that the word had to be held in tension with the reality of what was happening, which was a 10-year wandering through the Mediterranean world with Ithaca always the intention and always the destination and always somehow not the place that was arrived at. Poseidon was against Odysseus. This is the central obstacle of the Odyssey, the god of the sea who had heard the prayer of his blinded son Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and who had decided to make the sea a difficult place for the man who had done that blinding. Odysseus on the water was never simply a man on water. He was a man on Poseidon's water, and Poseidon had not forgotten. Athena could not simply override Poseidon. This is one of the important clarities the Odyssey offers about how divine power works in the Greek imagination. The gods are powerful within their domains and influential beyond them, but they are not omnipotent, and they cannot simply cancel each other out. Athena could not sail the ship home for Odysseus. She could not still Poseidon's seas by decree. What she could do was work in the spaces where Poseidon was not present. When Odysseus was on land or on islands, or in places where the sea's authority weakened, there Athena appeared. There she advised or arranged, or spoke through the mouths of other people, or gave Odysseus the clarity of mind he needed for the next challenge. She watched. This is described explicitly in the Odyssey. Homer makes it clear that Athena watches Odysseus throughout his ordeal, even in the periods when she seems absent, even in the 10 years he spends on Calypso's island. She watches with those gray, attentive eyes, and she is waiting for the moment when she can act. When Zeus finally permits the divine council to allow Odysseus's return, Athena moves immediately. She goes to Ithaca, where Odysseus's son Telemachus is growing up without his father, where his mother, Penelope, is besieged by suitors who are consuming his household and who believe, because it has been so long, that Odysseus must be dead. Athena comes to Telemachus in disguise and speaks to him with the particular quality of conversation that she brings to the young heroes she guides. Not telling him what to do, but asking him the right questions. Reminding him who he is, making him capable through the conversation of believing that he is capable. She tells him, "Go find out what happened to your father." This is wisdom as education. Not the answer, the direction of travel toward the answer. Not the solution, the capacity to look for the solution. She prepares Ithaca for Odysseus's return. She goes to Odysseus himself on Calypso's island and is part of what finally moves the divine machinery enough to let him leave. And when he arrives in Ithaca, disguised, ragged, unrecognizable after 20 years, Athena is the one who helps him maintain the disguise long enough to understand what he is returning to. She who can make a man look older or younger, more grand or more ordinary, as needed. She veils Odysseus in the appearance of an old beggar so that he can move through his own home without being recognized, so that he can see what has become of the suitors, so that he can make the plan that will allow him to reclaim what is his. She watches the great bow contest. She is present, invisibly, in the hall where Odysseus finally strings the great bow that only he can string, that has been waiting 20 years for a hand strong enough and practiced enough to bend it. And when he lets the first arrow fly through the 12 axe heads, when the hall erupts in the astonished recognition of who this beggar actually is, Athena is there. She ensures that he is not simply overwhelmed by numbers, that the long nightmare of the suitors ends cleanly, that the household that has been degraded for years is restored. And then she makes the peace, when the fathers and brothers of the suitors gather with their grief and their anger in the streets of Ithaca, ready to begin a new cycle of violence in revenge for what has been done. Athena comes between them. She speaks with authority and with clarity, and the fighting stops, and Ithaca returns to something like order. This final act is perhaps the most characteristic of all her interventions in the Odyssey. Not the sword, not the storm, not the dramatic rescue, just the clear voice, spoken at the right moment, saying the thing that makes further violence unnecessary. Wisdom applied to the moment of peace, which is the hardest moment to apply it. Across the ancient world, wherever Greek ships sailed and Greek communities settled, temples rose to Athena. She was not worshipped only in Athens, though Athens was her most celebrated home. She was worshipped in Sparta, in Corinth, in the Greek colonies of Sicily and the Black Sea coast and North Africa. She was worshipped in Troy itself, which is one of the most poignant details of the Trojan War's mythology. Both sides prayed to her, which means that her protection was something both sides genuinely believed they might receive, and both sides were right to believe it, and this is simply one of the irreducible complications of divine power. The temples built to her were almost always high, built on heights and cliffs and promontories, the kind of places that the Greeks understood as closer to the divine, where the distance between the human and the sacred was slightly reduced by the altitude and the wind and the quality of light that only exists above a certain elevation. High places are places where you can see in more directions at once, where the horizon is further away, where the world reveals more of itself than it does from the valley floor. Athena was a goddess of the high view. The temple at Saunion's Heights, though technically dedicated to Poseidon, faces the Parthenon across the water. The temple at Tegea, in Arcadia, was built on a plain but was elevated within it. The temple of Athena at Lindos on Rhodes stood at the edge of a cliff above the Aegean, 300 feet above the sea, its columns visible from ships far out in the water. Sailors saw those columns from the water and knew where they were. This was one of the practical functions of the great temples. They were also landmarks. The divine and the navigational were not separate things in the ancient world. The sacred high places served as reference points for those at sea, visible across great distances in the clear Mediterranean air, their white marble catching and holding the light in a way that the landscape around them did not. Inside the temples, the lamps burned. Oil lamps, simple and continuous, kept filled by the temple attendants, maintained through the day and the night, their small flames contributing to the warmth and the smell of the sacred space. The smell of olive oil burning is specific and ancient and deeply pleasant, warm and slightly fruity, nothing harsh in it. The smell of light made from something that grew slowly over years in the thin soil of Greek hillsides. People came to the temples with questions. Not always big questions. Not always the great life-determining questions of the epic heroes. Sometimes the questions were small, about a decision to be made, about a relationship that had grown complicated, about a project that was not going the way they had hoped. They came with offerings and they sat in the temple precinct and they were quiet for a while, which is itself a form of wisdom. The willingness to be still and to wait for something rather than to keep moving and keep making noise and never give the mind a chance to offer what it actually contains. Potters came and asked for help with a kiln firing. Weavers came and asked for skill in their craft. Architects came before beginning the most difficult projects they had ever attempted. Students came before the most important examinations of their education. Women came when they were trying to understand a complicated situation, when the clarity they were looking for was not arriving on its own, and they needed somewhere outside themselves to direct the seeking. This is who Athena served. Not only the heroes, not only the Odysseus's and the Perseuses and the leaders of armies, also the craftsmen, also the ordinary people doing their ordinary work and wanting to do it well, also the students, also anyone who found themselves facing something that required more intelligence than they felt certain they possessed, and who reached, in that moment, for the goddess of intelligence. She heard. This is what the ancient world believed, that the prayers in the temples were received, not always answered in the way the praying person hoped, not always answered at all in any visible way, but received, heard, that the reaching toward the divine, even when it did not produce the specific outcome desired, changed something in the person doing the reaching, organized them differently, oriented them more clearly toward what they were trying to do. The lamp in the temple burned through the night. The owl called from somewhere in the olive grove outside. And Athens slept in its valley, with the white columns of the Parthenon above it catching the moonlight on the Acropolis in the same way the temple had always caught whatever light was available, giving it back changed, softened and reflected and made into something that was both the original light and also something that had been through the marble and come out the other side. There is a quality to Athena that is worth sitting with in the late hour, a quality that the old stories reach for without quite naming, that lives in the space between the myths rather than at the center of any one of them. She is the one who is always paying attention. In every story, there is the moment when someone looks up and realizes that they have been seen, that the gray eyes have been on them, that the divine attention has been present through the whole ordeal, that they were not as alone as the difficulty made them feel. For Perseus in the impossible task, for Odysseus in the 10 years of wandering, for the people of Athens going about their daily work without any awareness of being specifically watched, for the potter waiting to see whether the kiln produced something beautiful or something cracked. The gray eyes were there. This is not surveillance. It is not the anxious attention of a god who needs to control every outcome, who cannot bear to let things take their own shape. Athena watches because she cares and because her watching is itself a form of care. The attention that says, without speaking, what you are doing matters. The trying is real. The effort has weight. She gave intelligence to the world. Not intelligence as a raw endowment. Not the capacity alone, which the world already had, which mortals brought into the world with them as their most distinctive quality. But intelligence as a practice, as a commitment to using the capacity honestly, to following the thought where it leads even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable, to being willing to look at a problem with clear eyes and say what you actually see rather than what you hope to see. This is the hardest form of courage. Not the courage of the hero on the battlefield, though that is real and she honored it. The courage of the person in the quiet room who looks at something clearly and says, "This is what is true. This is what is actually happening. This is the difficulty I am actually facing, not the easier version of the difficulty I would prefer to be facing." The courage to see. and then the patience to think, and then the precision to act on what the seeing and the thinking have revealed at the moment when action is needed rather than before or after. This is her gift, her constant, continuous gift to anyone who has ever asked for it. The night is deep now. The stars above Athens have made most of their crossing. The constellations that appeared on the eastern horizon when the city was lit have moved across the dome of the sky and are beginning their slow descent toward the west. The night will not be dark much longer, though it feels from here as though it will be dark forever, which is what the deepest hours of night always feel like. The city is quiet. The streets of Athens, which in the daylight hours are full of the particular energy of a city that is always making something, potters and weavers and architects and students and merchants and philosophers and all the people who have been drawn here by the accumulated presence of craft and thought, are empty now. The lamp in every window has burned low or gone out entirely. The arguments have been set aside. The work is waiting for morning. On the Acropolis, the Parthenon holds the moonlight. The columns catch it and hold it in that particular way, not reflecting it, not bouncing it back unchanged, but receiving it and giving back something slightly different. The marble at this hour is not white but silver, the color of the olive tree's leaves in a wind, the color of water in moonlight, the color of thought moving quietly behind gray eyes. An owl lifts from a branch in the olive grove below the great rock. It goes up in silence. Owls are silent in flight in a way that nothing else quite manages. The feathers of their wings arranged to produce no turbulence, to compress the air without disturbing it. It rises through the cool night air, climbing toward the height of the Acropolis, its round amber eyes open and receiving all available light, seeing the dark hillside below as clearly as the day. It circles the Parthenon. Once and then again, and then it glides down onto one of the old marble blocks near the eastern end of the building, where the pediment depicted in carved stone the birth of Athena, though most of that carving is gone now, removed by time and war and the complicated history of beautiful things in a world that is not always careful with beautiful things. The owl sits. It looks out over the sleeping city with those amber eyes that were her symbol because they see clearly in the dark, because darkness is not an obstacle to vision but simply a different condition for it, one that requires a different tool and a different patience. Below the Acropolis, the city breathes. It breathes the way all sleeping things breathe, slowly, deeply, without the quick, anxious rhythm of the waking hours. The houses are dark. The harbor is quiet, the ships sitting still on water that is barely moving at this hour, the wind having dropped to nearly nothing sometime in the late evening and not yet returned. Beyond the harbor, the Aegean, the sea that Poseidon rules, dark and faintly lit by the stars and the moon, its surface moving in long, low swells that carry no urgency, that simply continue the motion the wind left in the water hours ago, rolling toward the coast and breaking gently on the rocks below the cliffs. And above it all, above the city and the sea and the harbor and the white-silver columns of the Parthenon, the sky. The same sky that was there when the world was deciding what shape it would be. The same sky that received the stars as they arrived, one by one, in the ages before there were names for them. The same sky that looked down when Athena stepped out of Zeus's skull in full armor and cried out her first cry, and the sea rose in response, and the world added her to itself. She is here, not in the way of a presence that can be pointed to, not standing in any visible place. Here in the way that wisdom is here when you are very quiet, in the quality of the night itself, in the steady silver of the marble, in the flight of the owl, in the movement of the olive leaves in whatever small wind finds its way up the slope of the rock. Here in the lamp that was burning in the temple at the end of the day, and that by now has burned down to its last small flame, warm and steady, requiring nothing, giving what it has until it has no more to give. Athena watches over the sleeping city, not as a guardian who maintains vigilance against threat. The night is safe, the city is at rest. The owl turns its head slowly in the darkness and sees what there is to see and finds nothing that requires action. Athena watches the way wisdom watches, the way a mind that has thought very carefully about something for a very long time keeps a part of itself always gently oriented toward that thing, not with anxiety but with the continuous low attention of deep care. She has been watching Athens for a very long time. She watched it when it was only the bare rock of the Acropolis and the first buildings trying to establish themselves in its shadow. She watched it when the Persian ships appeared on the horizon and the city had to be abandoned, the citizens streaming out along the roads with what they could carry, leaving behind the stone and the marble and the olive tree. She watched it when the fleet of Athens met the Persian fleet at Salamis, and the battle that saved Greece was won not by the greatest force but by the better strategy, the use of the narrow water to nullify the advantage of numbers, the intelligence of the Greek commanders, and especially of Themistocles, finding the solution that was available in the specific geometry of the specific situation. She watched it being rebuilt. The Parthenon rising stone by stone, the marble quarried from Mount Pentelicus and carried up the slope of the Acropolis on ox carts, the columns lifted into place with scaffolding and ropes, and the ingenuity of engineers who solved problems they had never encountered before by thinking carefully about what the problem actually was. She watched it when it became the center of an empire that it called a league, when the tribute of other Greek cities flowed into Athens and was used to fund the building of the very temple that declared Athens's own piety and power simultaneously. She watched it when the Peloponnesian War began, when Athens turned its empire's resources against Sparta in a war that dragged on for 30 years and ended in a way that was not a victory for anyone. She has watched it through all the centuries since. And what she has seen is not a continuous success story. That is not what Athens was. That is not what any human city is. She has seen the full complexity of what happens when intelligence is given to imperfect beings who will use it imperfectly, who will sometimes be brilliant and sometimes be catastrophically wrong, who will sometimes be kind and sometimes be cruel, who will build extraordinary things and then damage them, who will ask the right questions and then not listen to the answers. She has watched all of this with those gray eyes, and she has not despaired of it. This is one of the most important things about Athena, that she did not withdraw, that the complexity and the failure and the damage did not make her turn away. She remained the patron of Athens and of craft and of wisdom, not because Athens always acted wisely, but because the capacity for wisdom, the possibility of it, the aspiration toward it, was real and was worth protecting and was worth continuing to offer her guidance toward. The lamp burns its last small light. The owl on the marble block ruffles its feathers very slightly and resettles. The olive grove below the Acropolis moves in whatever faint wind is moving through the city at this hour. That distinctive sound of olive leaves in wind, which is lighter and more continuous than most leaf sounds, a silver-gray rustling that goes on without pause for as long as there is any air at all to move through the branches. Athens is sleeping. Every house and every workshop and every school and every harbor, building and every marble-floored room where the lamp has been turned low, all of it is resting now, in the deep blue hours that are the furthest from any other day, that belong entirely to night. The Parthenon holds its moonlight. The owl holds its silence. The olive tree holds its roots in the thin soil of the high rock where they have always been, where the fire could not reach them, where the centuries have passed over without disturbing the very deepest part of what grows there. And somewhere, not in any specific location, not on any particular map, in the way that very old things have presence rather than place, Athena watches. Not anxiously, not with the tight vigilance of someone who fears what they might miss. With the open, settled, continuous attention of wisdom that has been practicing for a very long time and has learned that the best watching is the kind that does not impose itself on what it watches, that simply remains and sees and trusts the world to be what it actually is. She trusts you with the same quality. Whatever you are working on, whatever question has been sitting in the back of your mind through the day, that you have been turning over in the way you turn over a stone you have not yet fully looked at. Whatever you are building slowly in the way that things built slowly are built well. She has seen longer projects than yours. She has watched things that seemed impossible become possible through the accumulation of careful attention over time. She has seen the blank spaces on maps get filled, one expedition at a time, one observation at a time. She has seen the loom produce from separate threads something that no single thread could have been. She has seen what happens when a mind that cares about something keeps its attention on that something long enough. Let the lamp burn low. Let the owl go quiet. Let the olive tree breathe in the night wind, slowly, the way living things breathe when they are not doing anything but being alive. Let your own thoughts become less urgent. Not less real, not less important, but less urgent. The problems will be there in the morning, and so will you, and the morning is when they can be addressed. Tonight they can rest. The gray eyes are on the sleeping city. The marble is silver in the moonlight. The world is very old and very patient and has been through more than you know and is still here, still turning slowly, still carrying on its surface the cities and the olive groves and the temples and the people in their houses with their lamps turned low. Sleep. The wisdom that was here before you is still here. The lamp that lit the way remains, in its smallest possible flame. You don't have to hold anything. It is held. Sleep.